We going? I think we are live. Hello and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. Today we're going to be discussing Turkey's really exciting election. And I have to mute myself 1 second. We're going to be talking about Turkey's really exciting elections from this past Sunday and asking the question, has the fall of Erdogan begun? I think the answer is unfortunately not, but possible. Anyway, before we get into it, just some ground rules. If you're new here, we've got a live chat that should be to my right or my left. Please, in that chat, you can say anything you want about me. You can say most anything you want about Turkish politics, but please don't be abusive to the other people in the chat. If you are being abusive to other people in the chat, then I'll probably block you. The way this is going to work is I'm going to just sort of blather on about the Turkish elections for a half hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And then after that, I'm going to answer questions. But there's a lot of questions coming in, so I don't have the ability to go back to see all your questions. So you can discuss with each other and then just hold those questions until I start the Q&A period. And I will ask for questions. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. So what happened? Something that's interesting. Don't seem to be a lot of people showing up here. Anyway, doing it for 7 people anyway. I'm happy to. So what happened is this past weekend, Sunday, I believe the election was, the local elections happened in Turkey, and the result was somewhat surprising. I think the polls early on had indicated that Erdogan might do poorly in Ankara. That wasn't too shocking, but what is surprising is the degree to which he lost other cities, and it's looking very, very likely, according to the votes, he has lost Istanbul. And that's an extraordinary thing and quite surprising surprising to me, because I would have honestly thought that he would have already had the mechanisms in place to make sure that he didn't lose Istanbul, meaning unfairly. But it seems like he may have lost Istanbul. So I think to explain why this is a big deal, but this is not, in fact, the beginning of the end of Erdogan. This is, well, it is, but it depends on how you look at it. I mean, people look at Erdogan as this, they really look at him as this sort of nasty dictator, and I think there's way too many people in the United States that look at him the same way that they look at an Assad or someone else who's just, or a Maduro who's like, oh, this is a bad guy who has to get got, and, he's a dictator and yada, yada. But no, I mean, Turkey is a country with elections. And in the long term, yes, this is definitely a tremendous vulnerability for the AK Party, but thank God we're not talking about people taking to the streets and, Erdogan being pushed out of power. We're talking about, in the long term, in the sort of democratic process of Turkey, a democratic country, this is a tremendous blow to Erdogan. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of people, like, its full fruition won't be seen possibly for years, but it is a tremendous blow to him, and I think it's better for the people of Turkey that this be something that happens slow motion through democratic processes. And I think the question of whether or not the AK Party, that's Erdogan's party, is going to let Istanbul go is a really key moment in whether this transition is going to happen peacefully or not. That sounds a little too final, but I think it's a very key moment where Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, former prime minister, he's been in power for like 20 years. Well, sorry, 15 years. This is a key moment where he and his party can they've been telling everybody forever that, oh, we're really democratic and, we're just doing what the people want, blah, blah, blah. And, butt out of here, just because you don't like us or blah, whatever. This is a key moment for them where they can either make the choice that Turkey is actually a democratic country and is a country of the rule of law, and let Istanbul go, or they can clamp down and they can start becoming what large sections of the press and the government in the United States claims that Erdogan is. So I think that that's sort of an interesting thing, and sort of what the AK Party does over the course of this week is going to be tremendously interesting and significant for sort of the history of Turkey. Just to back up a minute, so what happened here was sort of local elections, and I think both the Turkish media and the world media is sort of confusing this a bit. At least from the, maybe it's not so confusing from the European perspective. I know different countries do this in different ways, but from the United States perspective, it's very confusing. We have at least three separate and independent levels of government. We've got local governments, local institutions, and we've got counties, which can be their own thing depending on the state. And then we've got states, which have their own elections, and this, that, and the other thing. And then at the very top, we have the federal government, the US Congress, Senate, and the president. It's not like that in Turkey. The levels are sort of a lot more compressed. It's not like, Bayburt province has, a different schedule and a different set of things that they do. And Bitlis does it a completely different way, and they have a different kind of House of Representatives. No, all of that doesn't exist. They're not province level legislatures. There's been some constitutional weirdness here, so I could be getting this wrong, but my understanding is in Turkey, the governors, there's 81 provinces. Most of them are associated with one big city in that province, but there are also smaller cities, villages, towns in those provinces. But in those 81 provinces, the governors are appointed by the national government, is my understanding. And once again, that could have changed because of constitutional stuff. But what really matters and what is directly elected is mayors, local governments. So that there's really only two big kinds of elections in Turkey. And once again, this could be screwed up by the constitution. I think the election for president, has Erdogan now been elected president twice or not, or at least once, happens on its own. The election for the parliament, not sure exactly how that works under the new constitution, happens separately. So you've got your national elections, and then you've got what happened this past Sunday, which is the local elections. Once again, it's not like in the United States where everything is on its own schedule and everybody's got their weird histories and whatnot. This was sort of top down from the founding of the Turkish Republic. So the mayors, city governments of every town in Turkey were elected on Sunday. So that's what happens. And I think this is misleading. This is why people can start thinking Erdogan lost an election, but he didn't lose any power in the national government of Turkey. He's still got control of the parliament, though that's a lot less powerful than it used to be because of recent constitutional changes. He's still the president. He's got another number of years before he has to run again. So nothing changed at the national level, but at the local level, things changed massively. And that's tremendously important. Another way that the Turkish press is sort of misleading, I was looking at Hurriyet right now, and they're like, once again, because I guess Hurriyet's slightly more independent than most, but because so much of Turkish media is controlled by the government, they're pushing a line that's like, well, the AK Party won the local elections because the AK Party, this is Erdogan's ruling party, certainly got 44%, I think it's 44% now, of the vote. I mean, and that's the biggest slice of votes. But this is as ridiculous or even 10 times more ridiculous than the sort of Democrats being like, well, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Well, that's not the rules of the game here. We're talking about local election. So because the AK Party, because of its been in power for so long, because of its institutional weight, because of its wealth, is present throughout the country. So sure, they got the largest slice of the vote, but I mean, you're not going to see a lot of success for Kurdish parties outside of Kurdish regions. You're not going to see a lot of success for the JHP or the MHP, certainly, as you go further east. I mean, that's a dramatic oversimplification, but there are reasons why separate parties are popular in separate places. Some parties didn't even run candidates in some places. The AK Party was everywhere. So if you add up all the votes for mayors and this, that, and the other thing, sure, they got 44% of the vote. And that's something that the Turkish state-controlled press is like really gravitating to, but it's a completely meaningless fact. And what's frustrating is watching that sort of translate into some of the coverage in like real outlets in the United States or abroad, where they're like, "Oh, Erdogan's party won the election; they didn't win shit." That's the thing about local elections. It's city by city, place by place, and you can talk about the aggregate vote count, but it doesn't mean anything. And what happened was fairly seismic, especially if the opposition party is allowed to win in Istanbul. And already many steps, the official state-controlled, is it Anadolu Agency, I believe, is directly and officially, not just, in a sinister way, directly controlled by the government. And they have announced that the JHP, the opposition candidate, won in Istanbul. And that's extraordinary because this guy was like, a local government guy. Like, I think he was I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name. I'm sorry, guys. But he was, I think, a smaller district president or something like that within Istanbul. And he was running against the former prime minister of Turkey, a position that I don't think it exists anymore. The last prime minister of Turkey, who is, a national politician who's gone around shaking hands with world leaders and was Erdogan's, right-hand guy. He lost to essentially a nobody who people are saying really nice things about. But so that's an incredible victory. So if that has happened, that's an extraordinary shift. So because of the way that sort of there's less levels of power in Turkey, cities are tremendously important. And so Turkey, this is kind of crazy, like Turkey's top 10 cities are all significantly bigger than the top 10 cities in the United States, or maybe it's only in the top 5. Now, I don't mean that Bursa's bigger than New York, but I mean the number 1 city, Istanbul, is a hell of a lot bigger than New York. The number 2 city, Ankara, is a hell of a lot bigger than Los Angeles, going down like that. So the cities are tremendously important. And the fact that that opposition parties have won many of these cities is extraordinarily important, especially when you consider that Erdogan, the former prime minister, now president, the guy who's dominated politics in Turkey for 15 years, and longer than that, started his rise to power when he was elected mayor of Istanbul in 1994. So it's quite a thing, and even Erdogan has acknowledged, and not acknowledged, I think, sort of bragged about that. The key to power in Turkey is first attaining power in these cities. So no, Erdogan's grasp on national power in the parliament, whatever that means, or as president, his grasp on the security services, media, that sort of thing, has not been shaken at all by this election. However, the fact that other parties are going to be in control of the largest cities in Turkey, Ankara, it seems as if they're not even going to challenge. It seems as if the ruling party isn't even going to challenge the victory in Ankara, which is the capital city of Turkey. It's the second largest city, I believe. It's only got like 5 million people instead of the 15 to 20 million you find in Istanbul. So even if the AK party chooses to steal Istanbul back, I don't think they're challenging in Ankara. So even with just Ankara, and I assume they got Izmir, even if it's just those cities that the opposition has won back, they can use the incredible machines of population, money, politics, business in these cities. They can start to attempt, and that's who knows how this is going to happen, because we haven't seen anything like this for quite some time. They can attempt to start taking those mechanisms of power back from the AK party. Turkey is in a country that's in the process of changing. You can find the elements of every kind of electoral system in Turkey. You can find, some of it's old school, 1800s the United States, where people are just getting votes by doling out free food and potatoes, and some of them Some of the electorate is people who are making decisions, based on what they think is best for the country, or whatever faction they associate themselves with for whatever reason. There's this whole broad mess. But a key part of the AK Party's success electorally, I mean, a lot of it was that they just do things better and were less corrupt. This is formerly, do things better and were less corrupt than the folks who came before them. But now they've been in power for a while, and they're the corrupt ones. So, sorry, we've got something out on the street. Hopefully that will go away shortly. I'm in Harlem, in New York City, and sometimes, even though it's vastly more peaceful than it used to be, sometimes there are sirens. Where was I? So I was talking about the way, just how losing direct control of the cities aims directly at a lot of the get out the vote efforts that the AK Party, that President Erdogan's AK Party relies upon. There's a lot of stuff on Twitter now. Actually, some of it very accurate. I'm talking about like personal friends' Instagram posts, but some of it, who knows? I'm talking about how in the run up to these elections, the AK Party just basically gives out free food, throws festivals, sets up shops where food is cheaper, like does everything to sort of goose things and get things looking better than they are. And now, the day after the election, 2 days after, or on Monday, yesterday, the day after the election, all of it just disappeared. There was a festival in Taksim Square that had been going on for years, or a year or something like that, and then the day after the election, poof, it's gone. So it's tremendously significant, and I am very hopeful. I think one of the cautionary tales that people are bringing up that people should, actually, I should say why I am hopeful. I was somebody who, when I moved to Turkey, was very suspicious of the standard line about Erdogan, like, oh, he's this crazy Islamist who's coming in and screwing us over. And I think I got a slightly wider, because of places where I worked, a lot of expats just sort of work for foreign companies, or a lot of my friends were just sort of journalists, or whatnot. But I think because I worked at Turkish companies, I actually got a slightly wider swath of what was going on. So I was kind of skeptical of just the knee-jerk hatred of Erdogan, because he did dispossess a lot of old elites. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because after the death of Ataturk in 1938, the old elites just sort of, some good things happened, but there was a lot of just running things into the ground and crushing of legitimate aspirations of just people who weren't them, whether they were religious or Kurdish or whatever. So I was kind of a little more skeptical. And then 2013 really changed things for me, the Gezi uprising, and I was like, look, Erdogan did do some good things, like getting the military out of Turkish government, could very well be a good thing. There's no denying that prior to about 5 years ago, his economic approach was stellar. So saying that, as someone who was skeptical of the standard sort of Dishmirak sort of Beyazlık sort of approach to Erdogan, I'm now pretty much there. I think he's been in power way too long. I think that he, after making very concrete and direct arguments against corruption and the evils of people who are in power forever, he is now one of those people. There's a reason why, in the United States, we try not to have presidents for more than 8 years. He's just been there too long, and it's just gotten worse and worse and worse. So I just wanted to clarify that, to make it very clear why I am, against the continuation of Erdogan and the AK Party in power. I love Turkey, and I think that Turkey's destiny is as probably a more powerful country than anybody in Europe other than Germany. As a real sort of great power. But I think that in order for Turkey to get there, it needs to be a place that can run itself well. And the fact that even despite everything the AK Party has done over the past 5 years, the fact that this past election, these local elections, had real democratic results is an indication that Turkey is that kind of country. And I think that for Turkey to be a real great power in the world, economically, culturally, this, that, and the other thing, Erdogan is a stage that they have to move beyond. So I am definitely like now completely in like your sort of Dishmirak outside power column, you know, rooting against Erdogan. But crucially, I'm not like a lot of these dipshits in the Washington, D.C. arena who are like, yeah, you know, hey, why not? You know, I mean, you know, we're not going to do the coup. I do not believe that the United States did the coup in 2016. I do believe, and it's not a question of belief, it's a fact that there were a lot of people in the United States who are like, oh, well, now that this coup is happening, maybe that's okay. I loathe that. I think that is insane. I was delighted to see Erdogan crush the coup because I believe that Turkey is a better country than that now. It doesn't need a coup. And I think that these elections, if the AK party lets them go forward, are an indication that Turkey is now a better, bigger, more powerful country. So yeah, just want to get my biases out there. I am anti-Erdogan. I wanted him to lose these elections. I've wanted him to lose every election since 2013. So I should be honest about that, so you know where I'm coming from. So a lot of what's come up a lot in discussions of these local elections is 2015, and in 2015, something pretty. 2015 was a really rough year in Turkey because it seemed incredibly hopeful. You know, I haven't gone back and checked these dates because they're kind of seared into my freaking soul. I was living in Turkey at the time. I lived in Turkey for 6 years. I think most of you know that. In June of 2015, after 2 years of just, you know, really rough Turkish politics after the Gezi protests and the crushing of those protests, the AK party lost. They lost the national election. Now, once again, they were the largest vote-getting party, but crucially, they couldn't use their majority to form a government. You know, they couldn't use their majority alone to form a government. So, I mean, there was quite literally dancing in the streets in June 2015, and I was part of that. And we were all incredibly excited. And then Erdogan, very, very cynically, you can argue to the extent to whether he, you know, just did it himself, but he certainly capitalized on a few terrorist attacks and having felt betrayed by the Kurds, who he had previously actually tried to work with, having felt betrayed by the Kurds in that 2015 election, he ramped up the sort of Turkish traditional fear and hatred of the Kurdish minority in Turkey. He ramped it up. They essentially restarted a no-joke war. Downtown Diyarbakir was destroyed. And, you know, successfully, you know, the opposition parties couldn't get it together to form a government. So I think he constitutionally was able to call another election. And it was now November 2015, and war with the, you know, sort of a civil war with the Kurds, low level, but serious civil war with the Kurds had restarted, and everybody voted for him, voted for his majority out of fear. So this 2015 example has come up a lot in discussions of this, and I don't think that actually makes sense. I've talked, there's a video from years back called "Why is Turkey So Messed Up?" And I think a real reason that, you know, Erdogan's still in power, and not enjoying a happy retirement as one of the most successful politicians in Turkish history. I think one of the real reasons why Turkey is, you know, invading another country for the first time in its modern history. I guess Cyprus, you can. But all of these horrible, horrible things have happened because of a war in Syria. And as I think someone pointed out, I think Logo Cool Extreme pointed out on Twitter, yeah, there's not, I mean, there isn't the hook of the Syrian crisis and war for them to get involved in. I mean, it's sort of static, and there's not a lot more for Turkey to do there. So he can't, and the Kurdish issue has been quite brutally solved. I mean, no, not the broader Kurdish issue, but the specific issue of the sort of war against the PKK, the separatists. I mean, it's ongoing, but it's no longer as dominant. And I think the PKK has been pushed out of a lot of these urban areas. So it's sort of more dormant now. So I don't think Erdogan has that ability. So that's a key point. But another real key point is I think that's saying like, oh, remember 2015, we got our hopes up and they got crushed. I think that also screws up something structurally. there is no constitutional way for him to rerun an election. This is not, there's no like careful negotiating that the opposition can screw up. There's a guy, there was a mayoral race in Ankara, there was a mayoral race in Istanbul. The opposition party guy won. There is endless scope, and I think I'll talk about that at the end. There's endless scope for this to go wrong, for this to screw up, for the GHP to be, turned into the bad guys for the economy. There's endless scope for that. But the ability to do what he did in 2015 just simply isn't there. Like, he can't just say, whoop, we're going to redo the election. There's no constitutional method. There's no plausible justification. That's why it was so surprising that that the GHP was allowed to win Istanbul. I think winning Ankara was kind of expected, but Istanbul, I mean, the power center of the country. There are 15 to 20 million people in Istanbul. The figure, I don't know what the official figures are at now, but people estimate that it's much higher than that. It is a fifth to a quarter of the population of the entire country and about a third of GDP. Don't quote me on that, but I believe that's what it is. So the fact that, like, if there was going to be, theft and chicanery and this, that, and the other thing, this isn't like 2015 where, Erdogan and the AK party can do it after the fact. They had to do it before. And I'm sure there was chicanery. I mean, there's chicanery, sorry, chicanery, it's a ridiculous word, but, sort of hijinks or theft, fraud, this, that, and the thing. I mean, there's theft and fraud in US elections. And there's theft and fraud in every election in the world. So there definitely was. So one of the crucial questions, and I think question with the AK party for years now, has been like, how big a margin, can they cheat to? Because people in Turks take elections very seriously. So there's only a certain amount, like a couple percentage points, that the AK party can get away with cheating. So like they had the constitutional referendum. I can't believe it was that 2016 or 17? And that won by an incredibly small margin. It was like 51% or something like that. So that was like, oh yeah, the AK party could definitely have cheated that over the margin. So you've got the mayoral race in Istanbul, and I'm very confident that the AK party, the actual vote for, the actual like real people voting for the opposition candidate were a lot higher than the 25,000 vote margin that he's got now. It's just that the AK party thought that whatever the percent or two of cheating that they did was going to be enough, and it wasn't. So it's very interesting. But so yeah, I think the point I'm trying to make is this is not like 2015 where things go crazy and be in disarray for a bit, and then Erdogan can just sort of boom, okay, we're redoing everything, and you're scared enough now to vote for me. It's just not how it works. I mean, these are local mayoral elections. They're essentially done. Like the horse is left, and it's key to remember. I think it's a crucial test for Erdogan, for the AK party, for Turkey in general, a test of their commitment to democracy, whether they're going to let this opposition victory in Istanbul stand. It's a really key moment. But even if the AK party doesn't let that stand, they've got Ankara to worry about. They've got a number, I think it was 5 of the largest cities. I should have that at my fingertips. I apologize. But yeah, I mean, they lost huge. If you look at the map, the electoral map of Turkey, I mean, Izmir always votes for the opposition party, the GHP, the main opposition party. But there's always been sort of a sprinkling of red along the coast, but now it's just this huge band of Turkey, this sort of Mediterranean coast. Yeah, Mediterranean coast of Mediterranean and is that Aegean or I can't remember. Whatever. This sort of coast is all red, and it's getting deeper into the country. And as with many places, many more people live on the coasts. So even if the AK party makes the terrible decision of stealing Istanbul back, the horses have already left the barn. This is going to be a very interesting number of years in Turkey. So I think the important question is sort of, what happened? How did this guy that everybody expected, I mean, he has steamrolled his way politically this is President Erdogan, for a couple decades now, most of a couple decades now. So what happened? And what has happened is something that we've talked about a number of times on this channel, which is the Turkish economy. I think I've got a video talking about Turkey's zombie economy from, gosh, coming up on a year ago. And then, did Donald Trump kill the Turkish economy? The answer being no. Turkey, for a number of years, had essentially every economist and business person in the world was like, when is Turkey going to fall? Because according to what everybody understands about economics, business, this, that, and the other thing, Turkey was due for a major crisis 5 years ago. 5 years ago, for sure. Erdogan, because of his power, his control of the media, his ability to manipulate business, this, that, and the other thing, it's kind of a masterclass on what you can do by manipulating the confidence of an electorate, of a people. And he managed to keep the party going, keep things spinning for half a decade. It's kind of an extraordinary accomplishment, but eventually reality will intrude. And reality has intruded. The Turkish economy is in desperate condition. They're running out of foreign reserves. One of Erdogan's proudest accomplishments was paying off all the money that Turkey owed to the IMF and getting out from under the foreign powers. Unfortunately, it seems plausible that Turkey might have to take in another IMF program. Not yet, but it's getting there. They're running out of foreign reserves. The currency, which was, I think it was about $1, 1.5 liras to the dollar when I moved there back in 2011, is now at 7 liras to a dollar. One of the jokes about why I stayed in Turkey for so long was because it's the only country in the world where my rent went down every month because I make money in dollars. So the economy in Turkey is in a desperate situation. And I think a lot of analysts, a lot of people assumed that the AK Party was going to be able to just bull through it because, and this is a crucial point that I want to get to, and I don't want to, as I've said, I am against Erdogan, but I don't want to, and I don't want to be seen as giving him any credit, but it's kind of, Turkish democracy surprised all of us. It is a fact that Erdogan and his AK Party, the president, control most of the media in the country. The media that they don't control, they can intimidate. There's certain, through strategic arrests and strategic firings, the small amount of media that they don't control directly has to, self-censor. So, they have incredible control over media, the ability to do things that would be seen. It's interesting. Some of the stuff that he does is a lot like Nixon. Nixon famously would bump Social Security benefits right before elections and send everybody a letter saying, "Hi, I'm Richard Nixon. I just bumped up your Social Security benefits." I think after him, they index that stuff to inflation, so presidents can't control that anymore. Erdogan does that kind of thing, so, and he's got the power of all the levers of power. So I think a lot of analysts, myself actually, I think the only thing I said about these elections beforehand was sort of like an ironic tweet, from last week, "Oh, I'm getting hopeful about these elections. Can't wait to get my ass kicked. I can't wait to be disappointed again." So I think we outside of the country underestimated the commitment of the Turkish people to democracy and, frankly, the commitment of the AK Party and Erdogan to democracy. Now, I'm not saying they didn't cheat. Everybody cheats. But they probably could have done more. They probably could have. They absolutely could have. They control the police. They control everything. They absolutely could have just said, "Yeah, screw it. We're not going to count any votes from Karakoy," a very famous GHP stronghold. So it's a very famous opposition stronghold. So I think that is sort of key to mention, is that we were wrong. The Turks are more committed to democracy than we thought, including the AK Party. And that's, I think, something that we have to admit. And I think something really freaking cool about Turkey. So it turns out all of this, this economy stuff, had a real impact, as you would expect. It could end up, and this was something we expected for a very, very long time. It was this sort of, among foreign journalists, it's sort of be all we really need to get rid of this Erdogan guy is an economic crisis, and an economic crisis is always, totally happening. And now it's happening, and it's pretty much what was expected. I do want to say that it's not just the economy. This result would not have been as unfavorable to Erdogan and the AK Party without the economy. But I mean, it's people get sick of the same stuff forever, and I think even Erdogan, with his, I mean, absolutely, I mean, he's got political mastery. He knows what works. He does a great job. Even Erdogan is fading. His constitutional referendum didn't do so hot. He has not been doing great. The coup, which I do not believe was started by Erdogan or the U.S. government, the coup was a tremendous burst behind Erdogan when the country was already getting sick of him. So that sort of like resurrected him for a couple of years. But I mean, the fact is, the Erdogan and the AK Party have a number of things that are sort of diminishing in importance. They sold themselves as the great economic managers. The economy hasn't been great. I mean, it's only really started becoming clear to all Turks for the past year or so that their economic management has been abysmal. But it's been clear to most of the world and the business community in Turkey and without of Turkey that its economic management has been abysmal for 5 years now. The sort of respect for religion that they ran on, well, they did it. They succeeded, and that's sort of a cautionary tale for the Republican Party in the United States that relies on the one issue of abortion to motivate probably 40% of the electorate they have left. If you do it, you lose that issue. So, I mean, respect for religion, and I think it's a good thing, actually. I think women should be allowed to wear headscarves. I certainly have some questions about what's happening to the education system, how the sort of religious ministry is being handled. I think that should, come back a bit. But Turkey is a Muslim country, and there should be respect for that. And I think that's been achieved. So, the AK Party can continue to shout about it. And famously, Erdogan spent a lot of time talking about his, Islamic bona fides in a really disgusting way. He was apparently running footage from the New Zealand attacks. I don't know if he was actually running footage. That would just be offensive. But I think he was using that would be outrageous. But I think he was certainly using the New Zealand attack, the anti-Muslim attack in New Zealand, as part of his election campaigning, which I gotta hope didn't work very well for people. So I'm saying that what I'm trying to say here is that the AK Party has been fading even without the economic issue, but the economic issue has sort of coming undone. And another key part, which is something that another huge part, is that the opposition finally got its act together, and they dealt with this. I think there's a lot to be said for the reason that the Istanbul elections have not been stolen yet from the opposition. My understanding is that the opposition had a lot of election observers out there, had people sleeping on top of ballot boxes to make goddamn sure that the AK Party didn't have the ability to get up to any kind of shenanigans. So there's that. There's also running people that people like. I don't have a really confirmed opinion about the leader of the GHP. In Turkey, parties actually have leaders. This is weird from the United States. It's not just, whoever the most powerful politician is at that given point. It's actually a leader that I believe is elected, or maybe just selected by, party members, or I don't know. That would be an election, wouldn't it? Anyway, so the GHP has a leader, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. I apologize. I think I really mispronounced that. Who a lot of people think is just sort of a wet sock, and he's sort of kept there and allowed to continue to be there because Erdogan likes how useless he is as an opposition leader. But the actual candidates in Ankara and Istanbul apparently ran amazing races. There was organization there. There was, crucially, I mean, the thing with the 2015 disaster was that the opposition parties hated each other more than they hated Erdogan. and sort of gave up the opportunity, the election that they had won. This time around, it seems like the opposition parties were more coordinated. And that's actually kind of an interesting thing, that for a very, very long time, there was a fervently nationalist group and there still is, of course, the MHP party. That's the immediate. Anyway, and they're like fervent nationalists. They're like one of the first things that you learn about Turkish politics as an outsider is how terrifying they are, and they really are. I mean, they're scary. I mean, they're quite like, let's go kill some Kurds. That might exaggerate. Well, it depends on who you're talking about, but they are, very frightening, whatnot. So obviously, back in 2015, you were never going to see the Nationalist Party and the Kurdish Party like get together. So whatever. But now it seems like the MHP, or what's left of the MHP, has sort of divided. It's become its own new thing that's away from the MHP branding and can conceivably work with a broader slice of people. And then a lot of the people, the vicious, nasty people, have just joined the AK Party. So. So yeah, even though the AK Party, that's a good point. Even though the AK Party has sort of absorbed one of the older parties, it's still sort of falling in the polls. So yeah, I think that's the key thing. Like one of the reasons that Erdogan has managed to stay in power for so long and be so dominant is that there's never been an opposition party that can make a plausible case. Like, who's the leader? I think this is before my time in Istanbul, but I think the last GHP leader was, there was some scandal that took him out, and he was a little stronger. So yeah, I mean, you can argue that maybe there was some shenanigans going on there or whatnot. So, anytime an opposition possibility would emerge, something nasty would happen to them. Some prosecution, some scandal, this, that, the other thing. I mean, the leader of the HDP, the Selahattin Demirtas, I mean, a Kurdish guy, was never going to be the next leader of Turkey, but he was charismatic, and he remains charismatic and interesting, this, that, and the other thing, and he's been in jail for the past year, something like that. So that sort of thing continued to happen. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the official leader of the GHP, the biggest opposition party, is sort of a kind of a limp dick, like, and Erdogan was happy to have him there, be like, look, we're a democracy. There's an opposition party, even though he's like weak and nobody likes him. To have a mayor of Ankara and a mayor of Istanbul that are members of GHP, sure, you've still got, the official leader of the GHP, but you've got real figures that have real potential to build that kind of record, the kind of record that you can use to jump. I mean, remember, there's no elected governor. There's no intervening step. Erdogan went from effective and relatively, fairly popular mayor of Istanbul to prime minister, right? Pretty sure that's how that happened. There's no intervening step. So now this opposition can hopefully get out of this, decade and a half of just sort of failure plus the crushing of anybody who looks promising. So yeah, I mean, this is a real opposition, and even if they don't get Istanbul, they have Ankara and other cities, and they can begin to prove themselves. It would obviously be much more useful if the GHP can hold on to Istanbul. So yeah, I mean, that's sort of what happened. It's the economy, it's fatigue with Erdogan, and it's also the opposition finally looks like a kind of effective opposition. And I think it's got a lot to do with sort of the demise of the old Nationalist Party, and the fact that the AK Party kind of ate it, and is still managing to lose market share. So the question is, what happens now? And the most important question about what happens now is obviously, what happens this week. It's it's 7 or 8 in Istanbul. It's quite possible that you all are looking at something on Twitter that the AK Party decides that none of the votes from Karakoy count, and the old prime minister is now the mayor of Istanbul. Haha. I mean, who knows? That could have already happened. You could be ahead of me on that. All of that is possible this week, and I sort of said it earlier. I sort of, but I think it's important It's important for Turkey. It's important for Erdogan. It's important for the AK Party to let the result in Istanbul stand. Because I think if they do that, they actually have a lot more power in international negotiation over the next 4 or 5 years. Because they're like, what do you mean? Authoritarian? Are you kidding me? The GHP runs our biggest city. How can we be authoritarians? And I think that would be effing great, because I would love to cut a bunch of, because that just cuts off a whole bunch of Washington, D.C. warmongers at the knees. You might have noticed there was a sort of F-35 decision. The F-35 is sort of the Joint Strike Fighter. I don't know if they actually, I think they might be getting away from that terminology. That's what it was known as for years. The F-35 is the new plane that the United States is selling to NATO members. It's a piece of shit, is my understanding. I mean, there's plenty of people who work for defense companies who tell me it's not a piece of shit. But timed to be after the election so as to not give Erdogan more ammunition to be anti-US, because that was another big part of his campaign. They cut off sales of the F-35 to Turkey as sort of a punishment, because Erdogan is buying a missile system from Russia because it's cheaper and better than anything the US offers. But anyway, but you know, is buying that from Russia. So this was meant to be like, aha, look, you won your election, and here, you know, F you. Unfortunately, now it kind of screws over, I think, the opposition that won all these cities, because, you know, Erdogan's got another thing he can point to. See, you know, look at what they did to us. You know, we can't let the GHP take this. Anyway, so I think it didn't work out so well. But a lot of that, I mean, the sort of falling apart of NATO is directly related to the fact that the U.S. betrayed Turkey in Syria. That's obvious. But one of the main justifiers for it, one of the, you know, 3 of the 4 paragraphs in any article talking about, oh, it's time to boot Turkey out of NATO, is claiming that it's not a democracy, it's an autocracy, it's a special, it's a managed democracy, as if the US is anything different. It's a managed democracy, an authoritarian democracy. It's not really real. But I think, honestly, like, the AK Party, not just from like morals, history, virtue, the AK Party also in very nitty-gritty international politics can win massively by saying, how are you calling me authoritarian when the opposition party runs my biggest cities? I think that would be very cool for Turkey, and for sort of ratcheting down tensions across the region. So that's the big question. Will Istanbul survive as the opposition? Will the opposition be allowed to win Istanbul? And the fact that you have to phrase it that way, by the way, the fact that I have to phrase it as will the opposition be allowed to win Istanbul is an indication that all is not right in Turkey. You know, it shouldn't be that open a question. So that's the first key question. The economy is going to get worse, like so much worse. The fact is that the currency has plummeted, and a whole bunch of companies have borrowed a ton of money in foreign currency. That means that the loans are actually 4 or 5 times more. You know, they're businesses that function in lira, and they borrowed a whole bunch of money in dollars or euros or Swiss francs or whatever. And the lira has plummeted in value, so they'd have to make 5 times as much money to pay back those loans. And already, banks, international banks, for years now have been doing these, they're called restructuring, sort of renegotiations. Okay, that's not going to work. Can we make this work? That's not going to work. Can we make this work? No. And I think at root, it's not going to work, because all of those restructurings are based on the idea that things are finally going to get better, things are finally going to turn around, and here we are at yet again a new low in, you know, the Turkish currency. And I think a big part of Turkey's economic recovery would be keeping their currency cheap. I don't understand money. I'm not entirely sure if that's how that works. So yeah, I do think we've already got massive unemployment in Turkey. We've already got a plummeting currency, and I think there's going to be some very serious defaults in the Turkish corporate sector over the next year. So I think the economy is actually going to get worse. So this presents a real problem for everybody in Turkish government, and now it is a problem that the AK Party and the Turkish opposition shares. The AK Party is going to, of course, be much more to blame for this because it's, their legacy of controlling things for the past 15 years. Also, they still control every mechanism of the national government, the finance ministry. Oh, there's some new ungodly name for the finance ministry that's combined and run by Erdogan's son-in-law. So they're still obviously going to be completely to blame for that. However, they are going through their pet media, starting the second after they accept the election results, they're going to start blaming the economy on the fact that the GHP has power in the cities. I mean, that's guaranteed. So that's a really important question, is like, how able to do that are they going to be? Are they going to be able to pull that off or not? So that's a really interesting question. Another one is, how will the GHP govern? I want to be optimistic about this. I mean, there are new people coming in with fresh energy. But, I had, as recently as 5 years ago, I had a really dispiriting conversation with a friend of mine who's, Western oriented, very uncovered, girlfriend, just open about drinking, this, that, and a big supporter of the GHP. And said to me ruefully, it's like, honestly, I prefer to do work in regions controlled by the AK Party because it's more straightforward and I have to bribe less people. But that was 5 years ago. Like, if these guys in Ankara and Istanbul can come in with the same new energy and urge to sort of sweep away old corrupt ways of doing things, because don't get me wrong, the AK Party and the way they do things is super corrupt. It's just not as corrupt as the guys before them were. So if the new GHP guys come in and are able to sweep away corruption and bring about results and continue formalizing and making things run better, then yeah, who knows? This really could be sort of like the next step for Turkey. But I do know that it's going to be tremendously fraught. It's going to be who knows? It has been a long time since Erdogan had to deal with any real opposition. Is that fair to say? Yeah, I think it has. He's, especially since the coup in 2016, he's been able to just sort of run the board. But he doesn't have. He got his new constitution. He doesn't have a state of emergency anymore. And at least many of the biggest cities in the country are going to be run by an opposition party. I'd love to believe that, it's the days after the election and, let's all come together to make a better Turkey. Maybe, who knows? I was surprised and impressed. Let me say impressed with the real democratic legitimacy of this election that happened last Sunday. Maybe Turkey can impress all of us as well, and Erdogan and the AK Party can work well with GHP mayors in Istanbul. I can't even say that with a straight face. So it's gonna be real interesting couple years, but it's a much happier couple years than I was expecting. There's a key thing here. There won't be, I believe the last national election was in 2018, and this was the local election. There will not be another, and there was also the constitutional election and the presidential election. So there will not be, I've seen a couple different figures of this, there may not be another election in Turkey until 2023. And that can make people, oh no, we won't have a chance to get rid of them or something like this. But honestly, these elections have been so damaging. They've been a major driver of how screwed up the economy is. The reason the currency is tanking again for this election is because of all of the things that the AK Party did to try to inflate the economy before the election. So I think it's actually, economically speaking, it is fantastic that Turkey does not have another election for 4 or 5 years. And it is actually possible that, the GHP and the AK Party are never going to like each other, obviously, but it is possible. I believe it's possible, probably not likely, but I believe it is possible that the AK Party leadership and the GHP running these major cities can take that next step towards Turkey being the powerful, impressive country that I really do believe it should be. It is, but could really be, by sort of governing together and trying to get Turkey through this crisis. And then in 2023, which is the centenary, the 100-year anniversary of the Turkish Republic, I mean, who knows? Maybe Erdogan can happily retire. And the GHP and the AK Party can be, the two big parties, and any, republic sort of trading back and forth, depending on their policies and the politics of the day. I mean, it's possible that could happen. It's not what Washington D.C. wants to happen. Washington D.C. was really happy with Erdogan as their new Saddam Hussein. The GHP and the AK Party governing together means that can't happen, and that would make me very happy. So yeah, that I think is my presentation. That was about an hour, and 70 of you are still here. I'm delighted. Do we have any questions up here for me? Oh, wow. Okay, I got a super chat, which means I have to answer that question first. My super chat question. Is that the only one I got? Someone will let me know if I've missed the other one. But yeah, okay, I got a super chat, very generous, from Aychan Genjolu. Thank you so much. Oh gosh. All right. And his question is, I want to know what you think about the. Are you guys still? I hope you guys are still getting this. I don't appear to be broadcasting. That's become suck. But okay. So Aychan Genjolu asked the question. Asks the question. Let me read that again. Shit. Why can't I can't see it anymore. Damn it. Can Aychan Genjolu or someone who's got a top chat ask his question again? I'm very grateful for the super chat, and unfortunately I can't see it. I believe that was the only one. But my question is, Aychan Genjolu asked about generally the connection between FETÖ and the CIA, and the question between FETÖ, the CIA, and the coup. I'm just gonna. Wow. So, can I answer this question without getting banned from Turkey? A good one. I'm kidding. That's not the case. All right. So FETÖ is Fethullah Gulen is. How do you even begin? Was actually a key part of Erdogan's rise to power. Is a sort of pet project of the United States in certain ways and not in other ways. And I think there's an affinity between the Gulenist movement, FETÖ or whatever, and the United States. It is inaccurate to say that the United States invented FETÖ or created Gulenism, or they're embedded together. That I believe is inaccurate. I believe that. So what my understanding, this is limited. I don't spend a ton of time researching this. Fethullah Gulen has a movement that became tremendously important in Turkey. Everybody agrees on this. Captured certain security administrations, police departments, this, that, and the other thing. Also built a worldwide network of schools and this, that, and the other thing. Kind of a really impressive network, worldwide network. And this network was one of the networks that helped Erdogan to power. Gulen is the reason there's this affinity between the United States is he's, sort of exactly the kind of Islamist that this is Gulen, exactly the kind of Islamist that the United States claims it wants. In fact, the kind of Islamist that the United States wants, as we see over and over again in their massive funding of jihadists in Syria, is jihadists, but the kind that they claim they want is Gulen, which is he's a religious figure and he's all about Islam, but he's also all about modernity and education and science and sort of putting those together. So there is this affinity between the U.S. and the CIA. He's the kind of guy that the CIA, or I shouldn't use, the general foreign policy community in the United States wants to support. And yes, that includes direct CIA support. That includes State Department doing above board things. This is in former years, certainly not now. So it's the kind of thing that the U.S. kind of likes. So when he fell out, he went to Pennsylvania, and the U.S. has, when he fell out with Erdogan, he went to Pennsylvania, and the U.S. has sort of protected him there. The coup in 2016 was almost certainly carried out by Gulenists. I don't think anybody really disputes that. you can get into all kinds of layers and levels of, did Erdogan know the coup was going to happen and he let it happen anyway because he knew it would be powerful, make him more powerful? Was the CIA working with Gulen and Fetto? I do not believe that for 1 second. I do think that the U.S. screwed up majorly because when the coup happened, and I know, some powerful people in the United States who, weren't part of making the coup happen, but that's just what people in the United States know about Turkey, because that was what is true about Turkey for a very long time, is that coups happen, things get a little too religious, and then a coup happens. That was their expectation of what would happen. So when the coup happened on July 15th, my birthday, 2016, many people in the US government, including, I believe, Obama to a degree, were kind of like, oh, let's step back and see what happens before saying, oh, no, we support the elected government of Turkey. And that was freaking shameful. That's a really awful thing that the United States did. However, I do not believe the idea that the United States made the coup happen. Do I believe that the United States was shamefully, disgustingly, certain elements in the United States were shamefully, disgustingly okay with the idea of one of the richest countries in the world having a illegitimate and violent transfer of power? Yes, the United States was. The United States is absolutely guilty of that. But I don't believe, always for me, I tend to believe that decisions are more about greed and stupidity than they are about some vast conspiracy. I know a ton of journalists, in Turkey, who used to be in Turkey. They, like real journalists, not like me, someone who just sort of looks at stuff and then, blathers on about his opinion, but like real journalists, people with sources, people who know people who, know people at the CIA, people who know people in the government, the Turkish government. Like, nobody really thinks that Erdogan's campaign speeches about the U.S. and the CIA and FETÖ working together are true. It's just not what people believe. So yeah, I think that I've answered the super chat question. Please, if you feel that I haven't, jump back in. There's another super chat there from Burak Dilman. What about the Washington D.C. Presumably, you said, what about the D.C.'s and Pentagon's attitude to Turkey? What about Washington D.C.'s and the Pentagon's attitude to Turkey? That is a great question. And I think this election, not for the AK Party or for the GHP or whatever, but for the benefit of all Turks, from the AK Party to the GHP, every Turk, all 80 to 90 million of you. An incredible benefit of that is that if this is allowed to stand, if this election result is allowed to stand, then the Washington, D.C. narrative about Turkey just got punched in the face. And that's something I want to fight about. I want to fight Washington, D.C.'s take on Turkey. So Washington, D.C.'s take on Turkey, obviously there's no one take on Turkey. Washington, D.C. is a blob, is the way that Ben Rhodes, I believe it was Barack Obama, one of Barack Obama's foreign policy guys, famously called it a blob. It's a bunch of thinkers and academics and their main interest is to find something to fight. Because it's this incredible blob, this incredible architecture that was built up during the Cold War. And after the end of the Cold War, after the demise of the Soviet Union, they didn't really have anything to fight. So they created this Iran obsession. They essentially turned Russia into a rogue state. Russia is a rogue state now. What it's done in Ukraine is inexcusable. However, they were pushed into that position by the blob, by Washington, D.C., by its expansion of NATO. This is what Washington, D.C. does. So what Washington, D.C. knows, I think a lot of people in Washington, D.C. know, but they don't want to acknowledge, is the way that they screwed Turkey in Syria. They absolutely, shamefully abused Turkey in Syria. What's really atrocious is one of the main ways so they want to turn Erdogan into an enemy, and one of the main ways they do it is they go, ooh, Erdogan supported ISIS. Erdogan supported ISIS, which is to a degree true, but Erdogan supported ISIS for maybe 3 months longer than the United States supported ISIS. So what happened with the Syrian war was the United States, Saudi Arabia, a bunch of folks, Turkey as well, were like, okay, let's get together and take out Assad. And Erdogan participated in this massively, which is sort of slowly being forgotten right now. So Erdogan got into this with his eyes open. But what happened when sort of the rise of ISIS, which was very much, I've got a number of videos on this. Everybody's lying about the Islamic State, might be worth watching. It's a recent one that sort of, I think, sums up what I think happened here. But it doesn't mention Turkey, which is unfortunate. Turkey, the United States, Saudi Arabia, with very debatable and unknown levels of consent and who really knew what was happening, basically teamed up to fire hose jihadists and weapons and money into northern Syria. And Washington, D.C. is great at fooling itself. So Washington, D.C. has edited itself completely out of that, out of making those decisions, which is ridiculous because, I had many friends in Turkey who were British and Americans who were working full time to overthrow Assad. So it's ridiculous. So they're taking all their guilt, and it's guilt in the United States for helping to create the Islamic State, and they're trying to shift it to Erdogan. And Erdogan is kind of participating. He's kind of being helpful because he'll go up and he'll be like, he'll talk some shit about Israel, which we don't like. He'll talk a lot of shit about the US. He'll talk some shit about Germany. He'll do all these things. And he's had a lot more leeway to do these things because we've needed him so badly, dealing with refugees and for this plot to overtake Assad. So in Washington, D.C., I'm sorry, I'm just taking a long way to answer this. Washington, D.C. is getting to the point where they want to set Erdogan up as the new bad guy. Turkey's the new bad guy. We got to kick him out of NATO. We got to keep the F-35s. We got to, because of a number of things. There's the ISIS thing. There's the Kurd thing, which is this is the way that the U.S. really screwed Turkey. Is that after working with Turkey and Saudi Arabia to set up a big jihadist nightmare in northern Syria, the U.S. decided they were going to fight the jihadist nightmare and use the Kurds to do it. Turkey didn't sign up for that. I think it's too bad that Turkey has a really bad relationship with the Kurds. And I think that's just as much the Turkish government's fault, Erdogan's fault, and the people before him as it is anybody else's. But regardless, if, it doesn't matter if one of my boys is getting in a fight and it's his fault, I should be defending one of my boys, right? This is like basic, decency, having an alliance, that kind of thing. Yeah, for the United States to get Turkey into this mess in Syria and then say, oh, by the way, we're not going to support the people we were supporting. We're going to support the Kurds to kill those people. Turkey was right to be like, huh? But the way it's being done in the United States is like, ooh, Turkey's crazy for not being as worried about ISIS as they are about the Kurds, which, if you knew anything about Turkish politics or history would make complete sense. So there's that element. And yeah, and Turkey and Erdogan have been sort of now that they've been so thoroughly screwed over by the United States, are trying to cover their bets and buy the S-400s and this, that, and the other thing. So there's this narrative that is emerging in Washington, D.C. that Turkey's the new bad guy. Turkey's someone we could start worrying about. And these things can take decades. Chavez and Maduro, the Venezuela people, for 10 years, it was, well, actually there was an attempted coup all the way back in 2004, but 2004, 2002, I don't know, whatever. But for years, it's just you build the narrative. You have to build the narrative first. First you're like, oh, Chavez is evil, Maduro is evil, da, da, da, da. And then after you've told everybody that this person is evil for a really long time, and then things go really wrong in that country, then now, after 20 years of talking shit about the people who run Venezuela, now it seems like the United States might actually try and invade. So I don't think Turkey's anywhere near that position with the United States. And I don't think we're going to invade into Venezuela either, but we're certainly, wasting a lot of blob money and time talking about it. And that's really what they want. They want jobs. They want work to do. So Turkey was falling into that position, like Chavez circa 2008, nowhere near as far along as Venezuela is. And if this election stands, if the AK Party lets the GHP run Istanbul, then I think that whole narrative falls apart. I think that's what I was talking about earlier. And I think that would be great because, if this channel is about anything, it's about getting really angry at Washington, D.C. and its insane foreign policy and its invention of bad guys. So, yeah, I hope that answered your question, Barack Dilman. Thank you. Have we got no more super chats? So I guess I'll just do some questions. Oh, no, there's another super chat from Aichan Genjolo, who sent me another $2. I hope I answered your question. Thank you so much. Okay. Logo Cool Extreme asks, will the Aichan Genjolo sent me another 10. Thanks. Wow. I think you have to read a little bit about Gulen, he says. It was the Trojan horse for the CIA. There's no way this organization can open hundreds of schools in hundreds of countries without help from the US. I think that, well, thank you once again for your generosity, Aichan Genjolo, but I think that undersells the incredible success of the Turkish economy over the past 20 years. Yeah, basically since the 2000 crisis until 2013, 2015 or thereabouts, the Turkish economy went absolutely nuts. And the Gulen movement profited from that in an amazing way. What's interesting about the amount of money that the CIA has at its disposal is that one of the largest CIA programs in history was the attempt to overthrow Assad. And that was only $1 billion. I mean, the CIA, trust me, I assure you, the CIA was not going to donate billions of dollars to build up schools for the Gulenists around the world. Are there grants that went to those Gulenist schools that came from US sources? That is totally possible. But and this is something that I've never quite understood about the Gulenists. And this is something that might actually get me. This is the sort of thing that if you clipped it out, might get me in trouble with Turkish government types. But my understanding of what the Gulenists are, and it's absolutely more extreme than this and whatnot, but my understanding is that it's a network. It is a network of power and money. And these networks of power and money are what rule the world. Like crazy. So like one of the classic examples is like you've got like a liberal arts school in northern New England in the United States, and 5 guys on their lacrosse team in 1985. This is not a direct example, but it happens. Something like this happens everywhere. 5 guys on their lacrosse team in 1985 all go to Wall Street, work for different banks, and not through cheating necessarily, but just by hiring more people from that lacrosse team. All of a sudden, everybody who matters in the pork belly market in the entire freaking world, was a member of the lacrosse team at, Dickinson in 1985. Like that's not a real example, but that's sort of how the United States works. And one of the things that I've talked about that really troubles me is that in the United States, it's now becoming like basically every president since every president since Reagan, who left office in 1988, has gone to one of 3 or 4 schools, and these networks are sort of solidifying. It's run, the United States used to be run by differing networks of power. Like a bunch of people from Texas would get in for 4 years, and then a bunch of people from New York would get in for 4 years, and then a bunch of people from California would get in for 4 years. For the past 20, 30 years, it's sort of been running by the same network. So in the United States, we're used to this. We're used to this idea, not just on the big like macro level, like the fact that people from a few Ivy League schools have been running the country for the past 30 years. We're used to the idea that a weird network, a weird alumni network is going to get powerful in weird ways. I'd love to, be able to build that myself, my college friends and I, but, and we actually kind of have that in a weird way, but not really. Because, we went to Michigan, we didn't go to Harvard. These sort of cooperative networks helping people get jobs, this, that, and the other thing, they exist everywhere. And I think what the Gulenists were a tremendously powerful example of that. And because they got set up in Turkey, which was a place that just didn't really govern itself along those lines, because it got set up in Turkey and also had some weird, by being religious and sort of on the outside and a number of things that sort of made it more powerful than the lacrosse team from Dartmouth or whatever. But because this network was set up in Turkey, a place that just didn't have as many other competing networks at that time. I guess the Gulen presumably got started in the 70s or 80s. It was able to become massively more powerful. And I'm not saying it's not bad. It's absolutely fucking bad. They did a coup. They suck. They sucked long before that. One of the interesting things was I have a lot of, unfortunately, just the way that, you know, the world works. A lot of my friends when I was in Turkey, I mean, I did work for other Turkish organizations, but a lot of the people that I hung out with, partied with, were just, you know, I think the term is pretty bayazlik. You know, they were just sort of snotty rich people. And it was interesting that my friend, sorry, I mean, these are my dear friends, my sort of snotty rich Western focusing folks, like when Erdogan went after the Gulenists, they were like, they fucking loved it. Because, you know, I mean, they've had a malign influence on Turkey for decades. So I'm glad that FETÖ is getting thrown out. I think that the connection to the CIA is overblown. I think the connections of many people, you know, it's hard to say because, you know, this was a tremendously powerful network. And firing and arresting 20,000 police officers probably was the right thing to do. But unfortunately, I think that the purge process went beyond that. So, and even if it went to 30,000 instead of the 20,000 that were completely appropriate, that's 10,000 people who got screwed over. So that's another thing about the FETÖ purges that bothers me. But so anyway, I have not talked about the FETÖ a lot. But yeah, this whole idea that it's a Trojan horse for the CIA that like poured all kinds of money into building Islamic schools all over the world. It's like, I really don't know. I just don't buy it. I think Turkey, and one of the benefits that Turkey has, one of the tremendous strengths that Turkey has, is that, and it's something they should be careful not to lose as they become more developed and more comfortable and richer, is that they're good at sort of sliding into countries and actually getting things done. Whereas, so Turkey, just from a business perspective, you talk about all these schools that they're building with Gulen, but Turkey's building everything like throughout Africa because they do it cheaper, they do it better, they do it quicker than like the United States, who needs to like pay, you know, 3 Ivy League guys $100 grand a year to sort of sit around and stare at a place before they fucking build something. So yeah, I think Turkey can get more done with less money, and I don't think it's CIA that sort of made that happen. All right. Any more? Okay. Questions. Barack Dillman will answer another question. By the way, you should have learned Turkish enough to pronounce the names so far. How many years have you been in Turkey? That is very true. But you gotta confess that Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu is really difficult. You gotta confess that, right? Yeah, my Türkçem bok gibi maalesef. 5 sene İstanbul'da yaşıyordum ama hiçbir şey konuşmalı. Çok ayıp bir şey. Yeah, my Turkish is garbage, and I apologize. But hey, you know, it's only fair. I can't pronounce anything from anywhere else. So yeah. Yunus asks, thoughts about TKP winning in Tunceli and doubling their vote since 2014. I'm embarrassed to admit that I do not know much about the TKP. Oh, the Turkish Communist Party. That's your, oh gosh, TKP. Yeah, man. One of the most incredible things about Turkey is that I love so much is that you can still find vibrant, it's like the 1930s. You can find vibrant communist parties. You can find vibrant nationalist parties. That's, you know, obviously not something we're much of a big fan of, but it just, I remember like in Beşiktaş, I think these are 2 separate occasions, but they're beginning to gel into my head. There's a neighborhood in Beşiktaş. Beşiktaş is famously, I believe, yeah, I mean, Beşiktaş, they've got if you're a supporter of the Beşiktaş football team, you're supposedly a little more left-wing or anarchist. I mean, that's a lot of rich capitalist types who support Beşiktaş, but you know, that's sort of the branding anyway. And Beşiktaş is also a neighborhood in Istanbul. So in Beşiktaş, on 2 separate occasions, I think they're gonna, I know in my memory, they're gonna slowly become the same day because it's just too cute. But I remember, you know, seeing a MHP, these are the crazy nationalists, a loud screaming MHP flag waving march down Barbaros Boulevard through the middle of Beşiktaş I think probably to antagonize the sort of more left-wing people in Besiktas. I remember seeing that and just being like, Jesus. I mean, it was terrifying, but it was also just like, wow. I mean, this is like we're watching like a, I mean, I don't want to drop the N word, but just like what the N word being Nazi. I don't want. It's like, but it was like watching like a nationalist march, and it was like, it's terrifying. And then I remember another walking through a park, sort of further up the hill in Besiktas, and just stumbling on this like really involved celebration of the communists taking Berlin in 1945, like, and just being like, so yeah, I mean, I don't know, man, like the Turkish Communist Party has managed to survive as like a vibrant institution with like they can go on marches and stuff. It's crazy the way that Turkey has sort of preserved a lot of like 19th century European politics, early 20th century European politics. It's one of the reasons I love the country, but I don't think the Turkish Communist Party is about to take the country by storm. I'd be surprised. Okay, questions. More Freedom Foundation. Have you heard about newsbud Sybil Edmonds, who opposed the Gulen movement? I have not heard about Sybil Edmonds, who exposed the Gulen movement. A lot of people exposed the Gulen movement. Actually, I mean, Erdogan has arrested people who wrote books about the Gulenist movement. I think they tried for a moment to say he was a member of the Gulen movement. I don't know. I shouldn't be mentioning this because I don't know the story that well. But yeah, I think for a moment that they tried to accuse one of the journalists that wrote one of the main exposés of the Gulenist movement. They tried to accuse him of being a Gulenist, and then somebody was like, "Wait a second, that's not really going to work, guys." So they accused him of being affiliated with the Kurds instead. So yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know about Sybil Edmonds specifically, but I'm sure. I mean, people have done amazing work on the Gulenists. More Freedom Foundation asks, so will the alt-right ever become a legitimate political force in the United States? It already is. We've got a president who's essentially alt-right. It's kind of like a meaningless label. There was a controversy this past week where I think The Economist called a particular conservative figure a member of the alt-right. This guy, Ben Shapiro, who I sort of did a video about. I wouldn't consider Ben Shapiro a member of the alt-right because he's a little too official. He's a little too well-paid. He didn't used to be. He's still got some really like egregiously, disgustingly racist tweets up on his Twitter account about the Palestinians. But now he's more careful. So you can't. I don't think it's really fair to call him alt-right. I mean, he doesn't talk about white nationalism, but he got The Economist to apologize to him, which was kind of ridiculous because people sort of like put up a thing. It was like, okay, what the alt-right believes and what Ben Shapiro believes. It's like a Venn diagram, where they've got the two intersecting circles, except it was like two circles that like almost completely, were almost completely together. So yeah, like sort of, what do you mean by the alt-right? I guess is the first part of that question. And but yeah, so like white nationalism, sort of essentially racism, for lack of a better word, has incredible power in the United States right now. As far as like actually getting together as a political movement, I think Charlottesville is actually a pretty good point, pretty good illustration of how that's more difficult to do, how that's not going to happen. They had a big fucking racist march, and people got angry, and quite rightly. The racists were blamed when somebody died. So yeah, I think you're not going to have like explicit white nationalism being like electorally successful in the United States. But yeah, you'll have, I mean, the Republicans will be have been pretty racist and will continue to be so. Okay, questions. Shivan Natiel asks, what is the best street food in Turkey? And I say çiğ köfte. Love me some çiğ köfte, even though I know it's not the real çiğ köfte because it doesn't have meat anymore. But I love that bulgur stuff. Big fan. Like awesome dinner for like 5 lira. Okay. What are we doing? We just angering. Are we just arguing about Feto? Philip Hess asks, what do you think about China's push into Africa? I am all for it. I think I think the Belt and Road Initiative has definitely got some abusive aspects to it, and that's not good. That's not something that we want. But I think that that's been heavily reported on, and African governments, African and Asian governments should be more careful now about getting into deals with China. They should absolutely take Chinese money, but they should make damn sure. They should make damn sure that he should. Sorry, they should make damn sure that that they get a good deal. And that's one of the best things about China going into Africa is that for decades, decades after African independence, the only option that Africa had was the United States and Europe, and it was really the same option because they would take the similar approaches to aid and whatnot, and it didn't really do much. I mean, they did stuff, did amazing things related to health. Actually, I should give more credit where credit is due. AIDS, and before that as well. I mean, just sort of everybody deciding that falling infant mortality rates in Africa was their business is an amazing thing. I mean, the Europeans have done great things, but as far as like developing the economy, just sort of never really worked out. And the fact that like China and the U.S. and the West, they're all sort of now competing to develop the economy, I think will do tremendously good things. It can go so wrong. It can go totally wrong. We could end up in another sort of scramble for Africa position. It seems like a lot of people are just assuming that, now that China is funding stuff in Africa, we're automatically in a scramble for Africa. And the United States government is already pouring billions of dollars into militarizing this conflict for Africa. And that is a terrible, terrible thing. That is a really bad idea. Because if it stays in the economic sphere, if it stays just sort of on that, then, it's just good for Africa. But yeah, if the U.S. keeps on doing what it's doing, and China follows suit, then yeah, we could get to a place with fucking Cold War type proxy wars in Africa again, and that would be terrible. And I think one of the ways to get there is to flip out about what China is doing in Africa instead of welcome it. And I think we should welcome it. Hey, Al Green, let's not be anti-Semitic, huh? Let's not abuse other people yeah, that's fucked up, man. If I see that again, Al Green, I'm blocking you. Barack, yeah, I mean, I know that there's a lot of people in my comments, a lot of people in my audience that I cherish who really don't like Israel, but you are hurting your cause if you attack people with Hebrew names in my comments. Yeah, I will never get angry at someone for talking shit about Israel. I, may not agree with you, but you're free to do that. But do not attack other people in these comments. Thank you. Question, Barack Dillman. Okay, logo cool extreme. Well, okay. Barack Dillman, let's keep it Turkey. Do you think U.S. would trade Turkey for Kurds in the short term? U.S. Middle East policy if she has to? I think that's stupid. The reason that the Kurds are sort of, no, not a stupid question, excuse me. I think it would be incredibly stupid for the United States to permanently shift to the Kurds from Turkey. That's insane. I think the Kurds have been very helpful to the U.S. now because they're helping one of the U.S.'s main goals, which is bases, which is the excuse to spend things on military. But the idea that sort of like the Kurds of northern Syria are going to be like something that we choose to go with over Turkey as an ally, a country of 80 million people with a top 20 economy, that's absurd. That's absurd. I think we know that in Washington, D.C., but I think Turkey's reaction, justified reaction to our cozying up to the Kurds because it lets us build military bases that piss off Iran and Assad. I think their interpretation of that as taking the Kurds side over Turks could force us, they could take actions, the U.S. could take actions, sort of there could be a reaction, and I think that's why I'm very against what the U.S. has been doing with the Kurds. There could be a reaction there that could lead to a permanent rupture between Turkey and the United States. I think that's very possible. But like, yeah, the idea that we would like, choose to ally with, the PYD or the government of Rojava over a top 20 economy is insane. I think, more business people in the United States, more of the, donors and funders, the true owners of the U.S. government need to pay more attention to what those dipshits in Washington, D.C. have been doing and have the way that we've been jeopardizing our relationship with Turkey. But no, I don't think there's certainly there's stupidity and greed here, but there's no intentional U.S. policy to go with the Kurds against Turkey. That makes no economic sense. It would just be insane. But dumber things have happened. All right. Question. Do we have a question? Oh, there was one from Local Extreme up there, wasn't there? Oh, okay. There's another one from Local Extreme. So has Erdogan done any crimes he should go to jail for, like Najib from MAS? Now that's a group for. So Loga is talking about Najib Razak. I'm sure I mispronounced that. I apologize. From Malaysia, who lost a surprise election and is now getting prosecuted. I go back and forth on this. I mean, did Erdogan commit crimes that could plausibly have him going to jail? Of course. Did Obama? Of course. Did Bush? Of course. Did Trump? Of course. The question of where you draw that line is interesting. I think Erdogan absolutely has definitely enriched his family. Is it the same way that Razak did? Will it fall on the same way, same side of the line? I think it's probably smarter, would be a lot smarter for the opposition in Turkey. I know this will piss a lot of people off, but I think it would be a lot smarter for the opposition in Turkey and for people to just sort of lay off on that idea. What we all want is a peaceful transition of power in Turkey. What we all want in the United States is a peaceful transition of power. We're already talking about Trump is definitely prosecuted. No question. I mean, that's a flat outright bribery that he's been taking at his hotels. The U.S. system is strong enough that I am perfectly happy to see Trump and his entire family go to jail the second they're out of power, or before, actually. And the U.S. system can take that, I think. The Turkish system is very, it's shaky, and Erdogan has a ton of support. And if it's clear, and I think that might have been the mishap in 2012 by whoever it was, it was the fall of 2013 when it was actually probably Gulenists, but networks within the Turkish state, security state, published a number of recordings of Erdogan and his family talking about stuff that was prosecutable. I think one of their big mistakes was, instead of using that to bribe Erdogan, being like, look, we can bury this if you resign or something like that, they instantly made it public, and they instantly made it an existential threat to Erdogan. So if you tell a guy that the second he loses power, he's going to jail, he's going to do everything in his power to make sure that he never goes to jail. So I'm, sure. Yes, absolutely. We know that Erdogan has done crimes. I don't know if they're Najib Razak, Malaysia guy level, but he's done crimes that, could conceivably put him in jail. But I don't think we should. And I know there's a lot of people really hate to hear that. But yeah, I think even if it's possible to figure out a way to sort of, maybe he doesn't care, just sort of guarantee that his kids will be okay or something like that, and then then he'll shuffle off. I know a lot of people hate Erdogan with every fiber of their being. I don't even hate Trump. I try not to hate anybody. I think everybody's greedy and stupid, myself included. But I know people would be really, really satisfied. Would be really satisfied to see Erdogan in handcuffs, but I would be more satisfied to see Turkey as a country with parties that exchange power peacefully, and then maybe 20 years from now, if Erdogan's still alive, you can well, do what they did to Kenan Evren. Didn't they put him in jail just as he was dying, the coup leader from a while back? But yeah, this like, oh yeah, to basically tell Erdogan and his clique that they're going to get arrested the second they get out of power is a good way to keep them from ever leaving power. So yeah, I'm not. So sure, you can arrest them, but but should you? That's the question. Okay. Moo0198 asks, do you think that Trump would win a second term? I do not think that Trump will win a second term, but he could. Totally could. Totally could. Totally could. Gras says, hey, Mo Freedom Foundation, a friend is writing a book about inequality in the United States. Any ideas or suggestions? Read some Piketty. I don't Piketty. I don't know. I don't have any. It's not a question that I've thought about at great length. Inequality. I mean, it's definitely something that bugs me. I've got a couple videos about it, talking about how that led to the power of Trump and Sanders. I think it's a real problem. I don't have anything off the top of my head. I don't think I have anything really clever to say about inequality at this moment. Logo Cool Extreme asks, are you enjoying gloating about the death of the Russiagate to your liberal friends? My liberal friends don't realize that Russiagate is dead yet. It's really interesting, and I think it's gonna just fade away. What's really sad to see over Twitter is the way that the people who got Russiagate right the whole time are just being pilloried by liberal folks. They're like, oh, well, you haven't actually read the report yet, and you haven't, it's possible that there could be something. So I don't think anybody's really absorbing. There's a positive side to this, because I do hate Trump, and his numbers aren't going up and seem unlikely to be going up. His popularity numbers have not gone up after the end of the Mueller process, and that's good. But I do think that people aren't really reckoning with just what a tremendous pile of horseshit this whole Russia thing was. Later this week, I'm going to do a little thing, not like a real produced video. I think I'm just going to rerun some clips that are, what the nice thing about being completely right about Russiagate is I just have to splice together and rerun some videos from 2 years ago. And I'm going to talk about, the Mueller report did exactly what it was supposed to do, which was keep Trump from being friendly to Russia. We now have one of the most aggressive anti-Russia policies we've ever had. So success. And I'm going to talk about that a bit. But no, I don't think the country is just so siloed. Like, people just believe things that aren't true on both sides. Obviously, on the right wing, it's a lot worse. People still believe that Trump has really, been great for the economy, when the economy hasn't actually changed all that dramatically since Obama. It's just the same economy on sort of the same trajectory. And Trump may have ended up killing the recovery, but no, he hasn't really done much to make things better. So they believe a lot of things that aren't true. But Russiagate is something that the Mueller thing doesn't mean a thing. They believe it in their bones, and they're going to keep believing it, which is really silly. It's sad to see anybody sort of delude themselves that way, but it is what it is. William Wallace asks, Mo Freedom Foundation, do you think Turkey is turning into a Sharia state, provided Erdogan wins 2023 elections? Well, William Wallace, I have a video on this called Why Turkey Will Never Be Saudi Arabia, which I recommend highly. And I have another video called Why Turkey Will Never Be Iran, which I recommend less highly, but I think is also pretty good. So no, I do not think Turkey will turn into a Sharia state. Is there a possibility that, actually I think there's much less of a possibility now that JHP has real political power. Is there a possibility that through some regulations, some regulatory changes or something, that the parliament passes, more elements of Sharia law become part of, the regulations or laws of Turkey? Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's possible. And I know that Washington, D.C. and the right-wing marketing segment will go absolutely apeshit if that happens and scream headlines at you saying that Turkey's turning into a Sharia state and they're turning into Saudi Arabia. I know that'll happen, but they'll be wrong. I think in the constitutional process, I need to track this down because I refer to it a lot, but I don't have the details as well as I could. But my understanding is that they just had a new constitution, and during the process, the AK party already floated the idea of like, well, all our constitutions have said since 1923 that the Turkish Republic is a secular state. Why don't we just strike that out? Why don't we just strike that out and become, we don't have to become an Islamic state. Let's just stop saying we're a secular state because, we're a Muslim country. And he was shouted down. Not shouted down, but he was shut down by everyone in his party and opposition party. I think Turkey's, as I say in that video, why Turkey will never be Saudi Arabia, Ataturk's legacy is tremendously important, and secularism is part of that. Also, I think the sort of turning into a Sharia state is a tremendously inexact thing. I mean, Sharia means law, I believe, in Arabic. So is Turkey going to turn into a law state? Yeah, I think there's this idea that the second anything from the Quran is introduced into regulations of the Constitution, we're all of a sudden in Saudi Arabia territory is kind of nuts. So while it's very possible that there will be things that happen that can be construed as a Turkey plummeting into Sharia law thing, I reject the sort of parameters of the question a bit, and I don't think that's a real threat. The thing one of the things that I've been talking about with Turkey for years that people just don't seem to get on board with me on this is that what happened in Iran was the result of repression of Islam. It wasn't because the Shah of Iran was like, hey, let's get along with the clerics and I'm gonna, people can wear what they want, they can do the headscarf, that's cool, let's just try to get rich together, folks. No, it came in the context of, enthusiastic repression of religious instincts. Turkey had that to a degree from 1923 up through really the 90s. And Erdogan's sort of crushing of that anti-Islamic repression, or rather the lifting of the anti-Islamic repression, actually, I think it's kind of like a disease model. Like it has inoculated Turkey against going for a whole hog Islamic revolution, because people are now allowed to wear headscarves. Religion is respected, this, that, and the other thing. The rigor of the old secular state has fallen away. And why would you have an Islamic revolution when you've already got, the basics of what you want and everyone's getting rich? So I think that actually this whole period, this sort of Erdogan's power, the AK party's power, has, I think, successfully sort of satisfied that urge for more respect for Islam. And I think that's great because in coming decades, it'll allow the country to just move on. Sure, you can wear a headscarf. Who gives a shit? Okay, I guess we've got some Imam Hatib schools. We could probably stand to have a few less Imam Hatib schools. That's going to be a really interesting clash point in Istanbul and Ankara, by the way. But yeah, like I think even if the AK party wins again in 2023, I don't think Turkey's going. I'm 100% certain Turkey is not going to full Sharia state, as William Wallace just asked there. Okay, questions? Richard Baker asks, Mo Freedom Foundation, your take on Turkish soft power in the Balkans, example of Albania and the new mosque in Tirana, which will be the region's best. My attitude towards that is a lot like a lot like Chinese soft power in Africa. We still exist in a very strongly U.S. controlled world. And that's one of the reasons I'd like to continue that, is that, you know, Turkey can build all the mosques it wants in Tirana. It can fund airports. It can fund airports in Pristina. It can do all manner of things. But if it's in the context, it's not like they're gonna, you know, march their legions back into the Balkans. I think for 500 years, Turkey had a tremendous amount of influence in the Balkans because, you know, it owned it. Not, well, it depends on where you're talking about exactly, but I think you get my point. So it's natural that some of that would creep back, and business relations between countries are not a bad thing. Business relations between big, powerful regional powers and smaller countries can be a very bad thing. But in the context of U.S. hegemony, you know, who cares? Sure, build a mosque, build a big airport. Albania could have used a Albania can use that mosque, and Kosovo can use that airport. So I don't. There's this real urge to sort of in the U.S. to sort of make any interaction of another country abroad look sinister. It's interesting. Yeah. Huh. I do it too. I've been thinking for a while about doing a nasty video about France's heavy involvement in West Africa. I think it's too imperial, and I do think it's too imperial. But actually, I wonder if I'm doing the same thing by caring so much about that as people are doing by caring about China and Africa or caring about Turkey and the Balkans. That's interesting. But yeah, it's a really bad instinct that the United States foreign policy community has, where they're like, oh, you know, Russia has investments abroad. You know, it's like, yeah, I mean, we've built this incredible world economy where you know, money goes in all directions, and that's fantastic. And it actually makes the world economy stronger and more interesting if, Japan and Germany are trading with each other as well as trading with the United States. You know, so yeah, so I think there's a real in the news. There's I guess to try and make the fact that Turkey is building banks and airports and mosques in the Balkans, to make it into news, they make it sound scarier than it is. You know. If you want to talk about irritating things in mosques, that would be Saudi funding of mosques and Saudi control of what's being said in those mosques. That I don't like. Interestingly, Germany is trying to kick Turkey out of its mosques, which I think I can understand. So Turkey's got this interesting thing where every mosque in the country is controlled by a government entity, and they also sort of set religious policy for the whole country. Is it Diyanet? Is that what it's called? So that's kind of an interesting thing. And because there's so many Turks in Germany for a while, that government agency has helped. I don't know exactly how it works, but I think they have a lot of influence on what is said in mosques in Germany. And the Germans have sort of kicked them out, which I can understand, or I've read something that they want to, which I can understand from like a sort of nationalism perspective, or just, being angry at Turkey perspective, which also makes a lot of sense from Germany right now. But if the Turkish government's going to leave those mosques, and then the frickin' Saudi government's just going to come right in, that makes a lot less sense. So, anyway. Local cool extreme. Is Turkey's refusal to become Islamist related to Turkish racism against Arabs? I wouldn't put it exactly that way, but yes. The idea that the sort of U.S. right-wing fantasy that Turkey's going to, turn into Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Saudi Arabia leaves out a really important fact. The only thing I know for sure about Turkey, after being associated with Turkey for 7 or 8 years, I've said this before, the only thing I know for sure, like I think I know something, and then I learned something a month later, I'm like, oh, that wasn't true. But the one thing I know for sure is that Turks hate Arabs. They they don't like them at all. They're happy to take the money from Gulf Arabs for construction, but they just don't like Arabs. I mean, some of that's historical, some of it's just straight up racism. So yeah, like the idea that there's going to be some unified, the sort of the fever dreams of the Islamophobe are always kind of ridiculous, because, it's not like Muslims are unified in any way. Now, would the Turks be okay with a caliphate, or are some Turks be okay with a caliphate or a more extreme Muslim state? Of course, as long as Muslims were running, as long as Turks were running it. And yeah, so it's not like they're going to sign up to Al Qaeda, sign up to somebody, somebody else's Islamic project. So anyway, yeah. Free Thinking Man asks, do you think Mueller protected Trump to avoid a constitutional crisis, even though the evidence was there, just like Reagan and Iran-Contra? No, I don't think so. I don't think the evidence was there. I think that Mueller's purpose was to make sure that Trump didn't do anything to make the U.S. more friendly to Russia. I think that's what Mueller did. I think that's what it was. I haven't seen anything. I mean, that's true. I mean, sure, maybe. If you believe that Trump or anybody in his circle was competent enough to do some kind of Manchurian candidate bullshit, if you believe that, then yeah, I guess you could say, which is ridiculous. But if you believe that, then yeah, I mean, Mueller didn't really come out with anything that wasn't already covered in the news before. So yeah, I think that's because he didn't want to go into any of the really thousands of separate stories that he could have gone into to embarrass Trump, because it would also end up embarrassing the Republicans and the Democrats and, you know, the Washington, D.C. establishment, which Robert Mueller is very much a part of. But no, I don't think Mueller was protecting Trump. I think Mueller, like everybody else in Washington, D.C., wanted desperately to get rid of Trump as soon as possible because he's embarrassing, but wasn't willing to embarrass anybody else in that process. I've got a video called "Why the Biggest Threat to the Mueller Report," which I'll probably be recutting some of later in the week and republishing. I think that'll sort of give you my take on the Mueller report. Okay. Questions. All right, I think we're probably we're closing in. Do we have a question? Mo Freedom Foundation asks, is racism in Turkey big? Racism is big everywhere. I've got a video called I Am a Racist. And it sort of talks about the way that really, like, it's one of the most natural instincts we have, and it's fighting that natural instinct is what makes us civilized. And that was one of the biggest things, because in the United States, we talk a lot about racism and how racist our country is. And certainly I have a long playlist about how racist our criminal justice system is. But what I learned when I went abroad, not just in Turkey, but everywhere, is that, like, what makes the U.S. unique is not unique, but what makes the U.S., I believe, a little further along in this. And we're behind in a lot of things like healthcare and whatnot, but like we're further along in this is we actually talk about racism in our country. And Turkey is not concerned to not look racist. You know, people, you know, I've had many conversations in Turkey where people will just feel like, yes, I'm racist against Arabs. And just like not really have any trouble with that. So it's, I mean, it's different, you know, it's a different approach. So yeah, it's a different approach. So yeah, but I think the whole world is super racist, especially my country. But I think my country is a little further ahead on like actually trying to acknowledge and, you know, work against that shit. So yeah, but yeah, of course, Turkey's a pretty racist country. I think anybody who's spent much time there can be like, yeah, pretty fucking racist country. And you know, and it's messed up because that often worked in my favor because I'm, you know, a white guy from the United States, so like I just get invited places. Like I had friends who were not. Who were Americans for sure, but you know, didn't look like the Turkish stereotype of what an American could look like. You know, maybe they were, you know, descended from. And I'm actually, you know, I can think of a couple black guys who had an amazing time in Turkey, but yeah, no, it could be more difficult for them. And you know, they weren't invited to as many places as I was. So yeah, I mean, Turkey is definitely a racist place, and I benefited from that. It was part of what made my part of what made my time in Turkey so exciting and fun was the fact that people liked having a white guy around, which is pretty fucked up. But yeah, I took advantage of it. I don't know what that says about me. Omar Nasreddin asks, Rob, what do you think of Russia landing soldiers in Venezuela? What do I think of Russia landing soldiers in Venezuela? Honestly, It's funny. Like I find myself sometimes, if people wanted to caricature me as pro-Putin, I think they have a lot of ammunition. But honestly, I think it's amazing how much money Russia has saved the United States taxpayer. I think if Russia hadn't gone into Syria, the U.S. military absolutely would have eventually. And Russia landing those 100 troops in Venezuela makes it infinitely harder for the United States to invade Venezuela. Not, and I think I had this conversation with Loga over Twitter, not because those 100 troops are a serious, or even all the troops in Syria are a serious bar the United States doing anything. It's the U.S. ideology about Russia to justify the amount of money that we spend on defense and the blob, the sort of foreign policy establishment. We have to pretend that Russia is a real threat to us. So if Russia had all these troops in Syria and Venezuela, and then we just went in and invaded anyway, then we'd sort of illustrate how not a threat Russia is. So Russia put some troops in there, we can't invade, or Russia doesn't look threatening. I mean, it's fantastic. I think we could easily have gotten into trillion-dollar debacles in Syria and Venezuela, but we didn't because Russia got in first. And I'm very grateful to Russia and Putin for that. So, yeah. Oh, God. There we go. I like Jim Bob Lord of Eskimos. Humanity is racist. It brings us together. That's true. Man, why are we all yelling at each other about how racist we are and Turkish? And that seems kind of stupid. Please stop doing so. Aycan Genjolu says, I'm sorry, you donated a lot. Said, bro, you don't even understand Turkish. How do you know Turks don't talk their racism problems? Because, and that's the amazing thing, is people in English will come up to me and be like, yeah, I'm racist against Arabs. I don't want to put anyone on blast, but I have had interactions in the workplace where one of the classics is, because I don't really want to go into detail on that one, but socially as well. No, because this will come up socially in the workplace. I had a friend who was from, he was very American. I mean, this guy probably on most metrics more American than I am in terms of his tastes and this, that, and the other thing. But he was of Asian descent. So he had like grandparents were from Korea or something like that. And just to be like, people would like say to me in English, like, oh, you're a real American. I'm like, fuck you, man. Like, not a real American. Anybody can be an American. So yeah, I mean, maybe part of that is like, and this is something that people in the US are always guilty of, being like, holding the whole world to standards that we came up with last week. So maybe there's some of that, but no, of course, Turkey's a super racist country. You fucking kidding me? And then I say that as someone who considers himself a racist. Turkey has taken incredible steps towards dealing with its hugest problem. Its biggest problem in the 90s, at the cost of tens of thousands of lives, was the dispute between Turkey and its Kurdish minority. Over the past, except up until about 5 years ago, Turkey made extraordinary progress in incorporating, enriching, and freeing its Kurdish minority. So by saying Turkey is racist, it's like saying, I'm not being desperately insulting. I think the whole word racist needs to be like de-weighted, like to an extent, because we are all racist. And Turkey has made incredible progress, more progress certainly than the US has made with African Americans over the past 10 years, towards incorporating, freeing, and enriching its biggest minority. So when I say Turkey is racist, as the United States is racist, as I am racist, I'm not saying that Turkey is evil or wrong or bad. I'm saying it's sort of a fact of life. And yes, as someone from the United States who's used to a more politically correct culture, day by day, I see a lot of stuff that, to my mind, is much more blatantly racist. But like, that's not like a condemnation of Turkey. And I'm sorry that it seems like Aycan Genjolu, after being so generous, thinks that I'm insulting Turkey this way. I'm just describing what I saw. And I think that this idea that being racist is like, you know, something that isn't something that everybody does and isn't something that everybody should work on. I sort of reject that idea. And I'm sorry if people are insulted by that. Okay. Okay. Do we have any other questions on this? No, actually, I don't think. Eurologi asks, isn't tribal a better word for this, to leave the word racist for the really bad stuff? And I say no, actually, because this idea that racism is evil and bad and different from us, it's somebody that we can all gang up on Twitter and say, you're bad, and get them fired, this, that, and the other thing. That idea that racism is something separate and different from us is something that keeps us racist, I think. So I think I don't think you should have this like careful hierarchy. I think we should all benefit. We should all benefit from knowing that we all have tribal or racist instincts within ourselves, and just sort of like pretending like it's this different, special, separate category. I think it's just a way to pretend that it's different from us. I really love I did a video maybe 3 years ago. It's just called "I Am a Racist," and I think you guys should check that out because I rewatched it a little while back and I was like, "Holy crap, that's pretty good." Okay. Questions. Baran Algan asks, "Do you think Turkey will get rid of Erdogan?" Well, I have just spoken on that topic for about 2 hours. I think that it's quite possible that Erdogan will fall within the next 5 years or so. I don't think it will happen immediately. May not happen until an election in 2023, but who knows? Okay. Local Cool Extreme wants me to talk about gun control, and at 2 hours in, I don't have the energy for that. I did actually write a video on gun control that I don't think I'm going to put out. I'm sorry. Barack Dillman asks, More Freedom Foundation, do you think U.S. hegemony over the Middle East will slip to another power in the near future? I think the future of the Middle East is Turkey, Iran, Israel, and Egypt sort of hopefully peacefully running the place in some kind of balance. I think that's the future of the Middle East for sure. With Turkey and Iran being by far the more powerful elements. That's actually how it was, sort of 500 years before 1918, and I think that's its destiny again. I'd really, as someone who's a fan of Arabs, I'd really like it if Egypt sort of stepped up and took over as well. Not took over, but stepped up and sort of became a powerful voice for the Arabs. That might be developing in North Africa now, but Egypt's just such a mess. Jim Bob Lord of Eskimos asks, when are you going to man up and probably embrace what could be an epic ginger beard of wisdom? Well, if you want to check out some videos from 3 or 4 years back, I think you can just go to the video page and sort by oldest. You can find some pretty epic ginger beards. Jasir Haidar Hamko asks, what are your opinions on the current situation in China where the government prosecutes the Urdu people? I think you're probably talking about the Uyghur people, though they could very well be persecuting another group called the Urdu that I'm just unaware of. I have a whole video called China's Brutal Empire, speaking about the Uyghur situation specifically. Why don't you can take a look at that. Logo Cool Extreme asks, is Israel becoming more bigoted? And that's a yes. That's a solid yes. And it's really sad. And Israel is becoming the kind of place that's getting harder and harder to support. And that's sad. However, I don't think that the United States will ever stop supporting Israel. But anyway, that gets into a series that I'm developing and probably won't come out for another year or so. I'm famously chicken shit about talking about Israel. I've spoken about that a couple times. I think I do have a video called Does Israel Control U.S. Foreign Policy that sort of talks about how I'm a chicken shit about talking about Israel. But anyway. Boran Algan asks, why does America support Israel that much? And you can find that. I would recommend. I think it's, yeah, it's the question. It's Mo. If you just search Mo Freedom Foundation Israel, that video should come up, and I answer that question for you. Local Cool Extreme asks, is the Uyghur situation in any way related to the slowing down of the Chinese economy? It's a really good question. I haven't really thought about that at all. Yeah, I mean, yeah, typically, if things are going really well economically, you're not really gonna, yeah, because it is the repression that's going on in Xinjiang is a tremendous economic engine. There's a lot of jobs. They are locking up possibly as many as 1 million people, and you got to hire people to lock those people up. So yeah, it's a good way to sop up unemployment for Han Chinese across the country. And yeah, so sure. And if the economy was booming the way it used to, then they just want Uyghurs in factories, not in jail. So yeah, I think that is a facet. I hadn't really thought about that before. Yeah. Okay, well, I've been doing this for about 2 hours and 10 minutes now, and I think I'm gonna have to. I think I'm gonna have to let you guys go. But thank you guys all so much for showing up. I'm really grateful that folks will watch me talk about this stuff for 2 hours. I am, I have a video called "Why I'm Optimistic About Turkey," and after these elections, I'm even more optimistic about Turkey, and it would be pretty cool. If this was the start of a new era. Who knows? My name is Robert Morris. I am the More Freedom Foundation. You can find literally hundreds of videos on my channel, the Mo Freedom Foundation. I have a whole playlist called Talking Turkey that I would suggest you look into. Most of my videos are not like this, just me blathering live. They're produced shorter videos that address a lot of the points, a lot of the questions that people were asking during the presentation. So I'd suggest checking out that Talking Turkey playlist. On Twitter, I can be found at RobboLaw. That's ROBBOLAW. Sadly, my branding is not consistent, but there's a lot of fun conversations like this that are just constantly ongoing at RobboLaw. I suggest checking that out. You can find me on Instagram at The Golden Age. I don't really know why you would, but it's there. And I am funded by you guys. There's a little bit of YouTube advertising, but mostly it's through crowdfunding on Patreon. And I've also got a PayPal link that you can find on the YouTube channel page. I've also got a book called Everybody's Lying About Islam that explains the way that all of Islamic terrorism basically comes down to the US-Saudi relationship. You should check that out. It's available on Amazon for the Kindle and in paperback form. I think that is all of my pitching. I just want to say thank you so much. This is really cool. And yeah, man, we had like 80 people watching at one point. That's pretty awesome. So yeah, tremendously grateful. I have high hopes for Turkey. I hope that they are realized. And thank you very much and have a great day.